I'll get started. I'm gonna do a little bit of a dance here to kind of allow Josh to get on the line. I think he's having a little bit of issue getting on the call this morning, but he should be on shortly. So, hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to River Shared Monday morning phone call. Hope everybody had a good weekend. This morning, our moderator is Josh Allen, and he'll be joining us shortly. He had a little bit of an issue with getting online, but here he is. So we're tickled to have him. And our speaker this morning will be Dan Clinton. And Dan Clinton is a mentor of both Josh Allen and I. So he taught us everything that we know. Or maybe not exactly everything we know. So, like, for example, he didn't teach me how to take off an oven door. So, all right. Well, Josh is on the line.
He probably could teach you, though.
Yeah, he probably could have taught me how to, and it would have been a better weekend for me. So, all right. There you go, Josh. And are you ready to kind of take over the moderator stuff? I was kind of just saying random words until you got on the line. So,
happy to. Thanks for covering for me. I had a last second bathroom break. Just wanted to make sure I was taken care of before getting started.
That's probably wise.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, yeah, thanks. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. I had the privilege of having a conversation with Dan Clinton here. As Dave mentioned, he's definitely considered a mentor of mine. I met Dan, I think, in my first week of college. I was, as green as absolutely could be, and I set up a meeting with him and to learn more about what biological engineering was and what stream restoration was, and go into his office, and he's like, muddy boots up on the desk, hands back behind his head, basically like a real life Indiana Jones, more or less. And I just said, from that point on, after that conversation, I was basically completely hooked, knew that this was the career path for me, and how I wanted to spend my life. So, Dan, good morning. Good to see you. Hope you're doing well.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So I just wanted to introduce you to some of these folks that don't know you too well, and ask you some questions about your career and some of the things you've seen and some of the things you've learned. So I got a list of questions here. We'll just go ahead and dive right in. I guess first, when did you begin your career and in that urban stormwater realm?
Well, I went to NC State, studied biological agricultural engineering. I got connected as a part-time student worker with Greg Jennings and Will Harmon as they were just getting into the stream restoration field. They had gone to one of the Roskins classes and got pretty excited about it and brought it to North Carolina, a lot of the concepts, and they were doing a lot of research. It was in 2009, that was back in 96. But in 2009, I took a position as a stormwater engineer in a small municipality. So between 96 and 2009, I was doing a lot of stream restoration stuff. And now I'm more engaged in the municipal stormwater side, but there's always run-ins and connections with the natural systems.
So when we're talking about that, or more the urban stream restoration, when were you first exposed to that concept of applying this design procedure in a more urban setting?
Well, I mean, back when I was at NC State working with Greg Jennings, Barbara Dahl, Will Harmon, they were back and forth between urban and rural stream restoration. It was really in 99 I worked with a company called Earth Tech and started doing projects that they had. Most of those were urban in nature.
Okay. What was the first urban stream restoration project you ever worked on? You remember? One of the first?
It was NCDOT's first stream mitigation project.
Okay.
It was a small 1 square mile stream through a park that DOT had purchased for stream mitigation. So we did a little C channel through an old lake bed floodplain, and we meandered the stream through there. It was and then we had to drop it down about 5 feet. So we chose about 4 feet to do that in.
I think I've been out to that site. I think I surveyed that site or monitored.
So there's lots of lessons learned when you're, especially when you're at the forefront of some of this stuff. And I have certainly learned a lot of lessons, sometimes the hard way, sometimes the good way. And working with good people help soften those lessons. But we all make mistakes, and it's a challenge at times.
But mistakes are valuable, right? That's how we learn as human beings. So the more mistakes we make, the more we learn. The more. What's the weirdest thing you've ever found in an urban stream?
Gosh.
Other than your cell phone, because I remember one time you lost your cell phone in Rocky Branch and then found it later.
So we were doing beehive on a stream in Auburn University. So we've got a small crowd, so I think I'll share this one. But we were doing beehive, and we had a group of students that we were teaching, the different beehive's bank erosion hazard index. So you're looking at erosion, and one of the factors is coverage. You're looking at what kind of vegetation coverage is on there to help protect the bank from erosion. And I'm sort of pointing to a section of bank, and my back's to the bank, and the students are up on the stream bank, and I tell them this bank looks like it's about 70 to 80% coverage, and they look at me and they're giggling, and I'm like, what do you? And I turn around, and they said it's probably about 99% coverage, and I'm like, what are you talking about? And there's a prophylactic device on the stream bank hanging off of one of the branches. So that's what I guess that's what you get when you're doing streams in college settings.
That's pretty great. So do you see stream restoration as kind of to go into the playbook that is like stormwater BMPs, best management practices?
I definitely do.
Yeah.
I've definitely seen it misapplied.
Sure.
And one of the things that I learned once I got into more traditional stormwater was I recognized the lack of understanding I had of traditional stormwater and how it needed to be applied to stream restoration. So a lot of those fundamentals, as a young engineer, I didn't fully understand. I didn't have guidance through a traditional stormwater engineer, and I see a lot of those principles that are sort of missed within a lot of the stream restoration projects that I see. And that's frustrating at times, because there's some things that seem to be fairly obvious, that are sometimes missed.
Sure. In your opinion, what are some of the big differences in how like stream restoration, or I guess maybe urban stream restoration, varies relative to more conventional stormwater BMPs?
Well, urban stream restoration, there's some more. When you're in a pipe, you've got a lot of more unknowns.
Sure.
There's
a lot more
less
controlled environment. Yep.
Yeah. So there's less unknowns when it comes to
totally agree.
the channel. But when it comes to understanding the forces and the velocities, I feel like there's it's a little more controlled. It's a lower factor of safety risk. And when you're talking about urban stuff, you're often confined with your floodplain. So, or other constraints, your sinuosity, your floodplain, your slope. A lot of the things are really confined in the urban environment. I see a lot of people trying to push stream restoration principles when they don't have enough floodplain, when they don't
Right,
have enough
right.
sinuosity, when the
Yeah,
the slope is too steep.
right. A little bit of a square peg round hole scenario, a little bit. Yeah.
I see it a lot. I looked at a stream restoration project last week, and it it was probably a 1.5 square mile stream, and they put up the bank height was very high, and they put a floodplain bench of about 4 feet on each side. I'm like, oh,
yeah,
why are we doing this?
yeah.
Why are we doing this? So that was, I see that a lot. I see a lot of times trying to push a stream restoration project into a situation where it needs, they just don't have the parameters that they need to do that.
This might be a little bit of a rhetorical question, but have you ever seen a failure? Or maybe what was the worst like failure that you've seen in terms of like from an urban stream restoration project?
I guess the better question is, have I ever seen a completely successful stream restoration project in an urban setting?
Okay.
There's a continuum. There's always
Yeah.
pluses. There's always things that work well and
Yeah.
things that don't. And it's and a lot of it's how you determine what's success and what's failure. So, and a lot of that goes back to the message that you started with, or what were your goals, and who's looking at it.
Right. In urban settings, your goals can often vary. Like a lot of times it's more of protecting or just stabilizing the channel and or providing protection for adjacent infrastructure or utilities, homes, that sort of reduce flooding, that kind of thing. Whereas maybe it's not necessarily nearly as ecosystem focused as it would be in more rural areas.
Yeah, they a lot of it success and failure sometimes is what's perceived by the citizens in an urban setting. So it's the people that live near there, the people that live adjacent to it, and how you go into that design, how you go into explaining to them what are the expectations, what are you gonna end up with here. And those first 2 to 7 years, it's a jungle. In many cases, if you go into it without any maintenance plan.
Right. Before you get that established canopy and then your understory starts kind of thinning out a little bit, you're right. It looks like a mess.
Oh yeah. So I had a guy from Vietnam, fought in Vietnam, and he explained to me that he didn't see jungles this thick and when he was fighting in Nam. But if you look at today, the canopy's formed out. You've got a lot of the hardwoods that have come in and really made a difference. But those first few years are rough, and there are ways. I think there are ways that a good biologist on staff can offset some of that with some targeted maintenance.
Sure.
But when you have, a lot of times we'll just have a team of engineers doing this design, and they're just not thinking about the next step. They're not thinking about, they're incorporating the vegetation, they're thinking about it, but they're not thinking about it. They're not taking it to the next step.
And again, as engineers, we're more looking at and focused on stabilization. And so more vegetation equals more stabilization. And so, but sometimes that's not always the best thing.
Yeah. I mean, the biologists are key to a lot of what we do.
I totally agree with that. Totally agree. So what are some ways, I guess, in your opinion, that we could better mitigate risk in these like more urban settings when we're trying to implement stream restoration?
Repeat that question. Sorry.
So what are in your experience, in your opinion, like what are some ways in which we can mitigate risk, like when we are approaching these stream restoration projects in urban settings?
Um, primarily with just a design that's appropriate for the setting.
Sure.
Floodplain is your biggest, you know,
Yeah.
Parachute, your biggest savior. If you can get enough floodplain on something, and don't design in a tight E channel,
Yeah.
And give it some floodplain. Let the channel let the channel do what it wants to do, but you have to have the room and the space to do that.
Right. So, I mean, obviously, right, like in urban settings, space is usually the one like variable that we have very little of, right? You know, you usually have either, you know, a sewer easement or a, you know, homes, backyards right up on top of the riparian corridor. So I guess from that perspective, given the fact that we usually have very limited space, I mean, would you think that it's actually better um, to not do the project at all, or if you can't, like, you know, have condemnation of properties and like and get that space needed for that, you know, that good, you know, floodplain connectivity, floodplain space that's needed?
I mean, I think the principles, a lot of the principles behind stream restoration are very applicable to some projects, and I think it's really good to build them in, but don't ignore the constraints that you have. Don't
Right.
force a meander into,
Right.
you know, a bank that's, you know,
Right.
if it starts to migrate, you're going to be taking a house at risk or a sewer line at risk. So, you know, in those situations, you may want to do a more traditional armoring of a channel, or
Right.
you know, if you're not going to have the time to let the vegetation establish, or
Right.
the flexibility to let the stream adjust a little bit. You know, our goal with stream restoration is to try to get the stream to where it wants to be, its end evolutionary point, or a stable point. But, you know, we may not have the time or the ability to do that. So, just, you may need to, you know, there are lots of stuff out there that we can throw in there to armor it a little bit more than maybe we would with a regular rural stream restoration project.
And like you said, you know, always just making sure you're going back to managing expectations and understanding what the real true goals and objectives of the project are. You know, is it ecosystem uplift? Is it, or ecological uplift? Is it habitat enhancement, or are we truly doing this to stabilize a channel in order to protect adjacent infrastructure, adjacent development?
Yeah, and I mean, we see a lot of our stream restoration projects in park settings, which is wonderful, but it's going to have to be managed, because you're going to get people that come in to the channel. The kids walking down, you know, think I heard a cattle are bad. Try a class full of kindergartners or first graders walking up and downstream. So, you know, you build in, you have to look at the whole picture and what's going to happen, and build that into your design.
Yeah, I saw a bank failure once at in a town called Morrisville, which is not too far from where you are, Dan, where they had a frisbee golf course, and the course kind of zigzagged across the creek. You know, the holes went back and forth across the creek, so you could see every place where people would walk across the creek, down the bank, and up the bank on the other side, and there was failures at every point. So I absolutely agree with that, and I've seen it myself.
Yeah, my favorite was, we did a project in the Forest Service. It was at a picnic area, and there were kids that the amount of bed load that a group of picnickers can pick up and move is remarkable. And we built a cross vein that you know, North State Environmental was working with us, and they built a cross vein that was our access to the creek. And then we could fence off the rest of the spots, and there were a whole bunch of river rocks there the kids could play with. So I'm sure the pool got filled in with rocks, but it was a good access point.
Yeah, we need to, Dave, probably come up with a sediment rating curve for bed load per elementary school child, some sort of relationship there.
Yeah, it would be very high, I guarantee you that.
So, you know, like you mentioned parks, that's actually, I mean, it's an interesting concept of, you know, taking an area, instead of kind of using the avoidance mechanism of just kind of building around the stream, you actually incorporate that channel or that stream environment into the park plan, you know, include some intentional access points and, you know, potentially some, you know, aesthetic elements to the restoration. I mean, have you ever been a part of a project like that?
Yeah, I mean, we municipality I work at now, we're looking back at a project, and there's, you know, there was some there's some concerned banks that we
Sure.
have, and
Sure.
there's no way for us to get in there without wiping out all the trees we planted.
Mm,
So there was no maintenance consideration whatsoever to this.
Sure.
And it was in a park setting.
Yep.
But the bigger challenges I see even is the ones through neighborhoods.
Yep.
The folks just don't, it's hard for them to comprehend what this is going to look like in 10 years, or
mhm,
you know, they come in with their weed eaters and
mhm.
hedge trimmers, and
Right, because you're dealing with private property at that point, and so it's yeah, a lot harder to control and have an area in which you can manage, because there's so many variables, there's so many people.
yeah.
Well, have you, I guess, in those settings, those park settings, I mean, how do you feel like that, like stream restoration in general has been received by the community? I mean, has there been like recreational or, you know, yeah, opportunities for the public, and, you know, in regards to stream restoration?
Yeah, and done in conjunction with some other urban BMPs,
Mm-hmm.
you know, some storm ponds and things like
Mhm.
that. The educational opportunities is excellent if it's done correctly. Funneling people to targeted areas and fencing them out of some other areas.
Sure.
Making certain locations more appealing, more open, manage the understory, managing the vegetation.
Right.
Those are the things that I've seen that have worked the best. And using signage on bridge crossings and things like that, where you're sort of explaining, giving the citizens a little sense of what we're trying to do here
Mhm.
and why.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I've noticed that like a lot of times when you can include that public involvement component to a project, that can really help with acquiring fund or access to a lot more like grant funding opportunities.
Yeah. People love their trees.
Oh yeah.
People love trees. As an urban stormwater person, I'm not the biggest fan of trees, but that's because they're, you know, they clog up my pipes and they pull up the sidewalks and tear up the
Sure.
roads. But
Sure.
there are ways to build them into the stream restoration projects are excellent opportunities for building those in, if you're working with good biologists that understand what trees need to be where and how they need to be maintained.
Yeah, understand that vegetative community, and, you know, what's missing, what's going to thrive, and how all those different species kind of work together in harmony. Yeah, I totally agree. So I guess my last question for you is, in your opinion, you know, what would have to change from like in a perspective of like from an urban stream restoration, in order for it to be considered more of a preferred alternative when people are considering, you know, what stormwater practices, what stormwater BMPs to implement in their for their development, for their park, for their, you know, what have you.
I feel like education is the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the designer doesn't need to be the most, you know, the only person with education.
Right.
It's a team of people. It's the biologist, it's the maintenance people, you know, running the designs through your maintenance personnel so they can look at it from that perspective, because the biologists are going to put trees everywhere.
Right.
And the engineer is gonna design it so it's, you know, moving water and sediment just fine. But if we need to maintain it, these guys that get out there, the guys and girls that get out there every day and have to do the maintenance are critical. Both the vegetation maintenance and the you know, how are we going to get a little mini backhoe in here? How are we going to get rocks in here? Is there a dedicated access path? So that education comes from the team, not just the individual. And it's important to understand both the natural processes and the physical processes. So it's important to be mentored by a traditional stormwater engineer and a natural channel design engineer or designer.
Yeah, and having worked on some municipal work in the past, it's amazing to me. It always stands out to me how important maintenance is, because there, we can design and build all these, big grandeur things, but if we can't maintain them, then, or if we can't afford to maintain them, then like, what are we doing? And like, it's such a key element to design that a lot of people, I don't consider.
Yeah, and the project manager on the design side is just, he's finished his project, he's moving on to the next project.
Right.
With these stream projects, they don't go away. They're going to be there for a while, because you're going to need to inspect them, monitor them, and they're all going to need some level of maintenance, or they're going to need some level of understanding. Another issue I see is that people are overreacting to problems. So you've got, you may have a little eroded bank. Well, until you understand what that stream's trying to tell you it wants to do, maybe we don't rush to jump in and make a repair, but give it some time. So that's where it takes the team of people. The maintenance person is going to want to jump in there.
Right. Throw a bunch of riprap at it. Yeah.
Yep. And but what's the stream telling you what it wants to do? Is it, is this a cut bank that's going to continue? Or is it going to, has it gotten itself enough floodplain that it's not really going to go anywhere, or there are trees behind there? And, there's so many factors, but I see a lot of overreacting to little problems that they're not going to get any worse. And, it may heal itself over time as the roots come in and the vegetation comes in, or the sediment, and you're looking upstream and downstream of a problem too.
Right.
And not just at that problem, because that helps tell you the whole story of what it's really trying to do.
Yeah, because erosion is a natural process, and it happens in stable channels, erosion and deposition. And so like you said, I think that's a great point of having a monitoring and a maintenance plan for more urban projects, because in more rural projects, right, the goal is, the intent is to, once you're done, you walk away and you don't really want to touch it ever again. So that's an interesting concept to like maybe start including operations and maintenance plans or manuals in with as a component of your urban stream restoration design.
Yeah, I mean, when I put my concrete pipe in the ground, I'm probably not going to look at it for once over the night. We have a goal of doing 10% inspection per year, so we're looking at a pipe once every 10 years at best.
Right.
Most municipalities don't even look at them at all. So we're not, but there's a lower risk level from a pipe, generally speaking. When that stream's wide open, everyone's seeing it, and it's there for everyone to overreact at times.
Yeah, nobody cares about it if it's buried underground, right? Well, that's our time. Dan, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your story, or a little bit of your story. It was a pleasure talking to you. And yeah, I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Josh. Good seeing you again. And
yeah,
thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll hang on for a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, please do.